Chavre, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilich, begashmus und beruchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Freilich and Chodesh. Today is a very special day. We have the milus of 2 months. Chodesh Nisan is a month of miracles. Lamed Nisan, but today is also the first day, Aleph, the Chodesh Iyar, which is connected to Anochi Hashem Reifecha Rosh Tevis Iyar. And this week's Parshas, Tazria Metzora. And yesterday was not yesterday, but Wednesday was Ches Nisan, a day which the Chabad Chassidim take very, very seriously as a command, a call to focus everything, our energies, on bringing Mashiach. So we have to connect all these concepts together. It's also, we are going to learn Perek Sheni of Pirkei Avos. So, what is the connection between all these concepts? Before we begin, we'll start with the prayer as usual. I'm going to say the prayer, the concluding words of the prayer of Asher Yotzar. And Baruch Atah Hashem, Reifei Chol Basar, U'Mafli Lasois. Blessed be Hashem, the one who heals all flesh and does wonders. Everyone talks about how amazing the bracha of Asher Yotzar is, and how it contains such amazing, wonderful words, and how people should take it much more seriously, and that it would bring great, great healing to the world. So this is the blessing that we're asking for. All those that are unwell should be completely healed, and especially today, Aleph the Rosh Chodesh Iyar Ani Hashem Reifecha. So may Hashem bring the ultimate healing, where there's no trace of any kind left from any disease. And also going to be connected to the subject we're speaking later, that not only do we become healed, but there's still a wound or some impression left from before you were sick. In other words, you're not the same. Not even that you should become as good as ever, but the highest level, you should be better than ever. As we'll see today later about Zdoinos Nasali Kizachias. In Avodas Hashem, this would mean that the sins become transformed into mitzvahs. That's the highest level. Anyways, so this week's Parshas, Tazria Metzora, both Parshas talk about the union of tzaras. There were something which is called lesions. It was something which is totally supernatural, as we'll explain later today. The truth is, in previous years, we also spoke about it for those that look up the videos from other years. So some of the issues we're going to talk about today we mentioned before, but most of it is not, meaning, as in every subject, you could talk about, write books about any subject you want in Yiddishkeit. It's an entire book, and obviously that's the connection. When you're writing a book about a subject, it's all in the same book, but there's different chapters. Okay, so this is basically based on a Sikha the Rabbi, in Chilik Zayin Metzora. But before we get to that, the importance and relevance of today's talk is, when we talk about everything in life, whatever the subject is, a person has a job. So the question is, what difference does it make? How do we measure success? There's something called performance indicators. And the similar sort of discussion is about, I think I mentioned this once before, there's something in Limud HaTorah and Nigla, it's called Chekiras. Many of the great Gedolim, many of the great Go'onim were very expert at looking at something and say, well, there's two ways to look at it. Doesn't mean this or doesn't mean that. Not to make a mockery, but someone could ask a question, and this is the point I want to bring out. Is the table on top of the floor, or is the floor under the table? Now, is that a valid question, or is that a foolish question? Good question. Now, if you could prove what's a nafkemina la'alacha, a practical difference, impact, consequence, outcome, that is different whether I look at the table as being on top of the floor or whether I look at it as the floor being under the table, then it's a valid debate, a valid question, a valid chakira in Nigla Torah by all these great Talmudists. So now we have a question, a simple question. The Rabbi in the Sikha of Ches Nisan said, Tut alts was I can't. Do everything you can to bring Mashiach. So the question is, what does it mean, do everything you can? And we could discuss it. We could look at it this way, we could look at it that way, but quantify it, qualify it. What does it mean? Do everything that you can. Or to put it differently, what difference does it make if I was a Jew who was doing everything I can to bring Mashiach or not? How do we measure it? So, we're going to see today certain differences, whether we have, Rahman al-Islam, what's called a golus mentality, an exile mentality, victim mentality, or if we have a geula mentality. A geula mentality means a victor mentality, not victim. Winner mentality, redeemed mentality, liberated mentality. So we're going to see a couple of differences. Now, obviously, the truth is, if we're really being honest, and we say, and the Rebbe says, "Tut alles was can't," that means that you're not sleeping. It means every single minute of your day you're obsessed with something. Imagine, God forbid, you're living through a crisis, and someone's life was in danger, someone close to you, someone from your family, or even if imagine you were dealing with a business deal that involved billions or millions, and your entire fortune was hinging upon this deal. How much would you be obsessed with the thoughts about this deal and how you should make it good for you, etc. So obviously that would be a simple indicator about whether you're living Mashiach dik, because the Rebbe said not only tut alts was a cancer bringing Mashiach, the Rebbe also spoke about living Mashiach dik. So today we'll just give two simple examples connected to our parsha, and what I love about it is it's a nafkamina in Jewish life. Now, one of these examples is concerning the name of this week's Parsha, Metzora. And that's what the Rebbe discusses in Likutei Sichos Chelik Zayin. We know that the days of the Rishonim, which is like 800 years ago, 750 years ago plus, the Siddur of Rav Sadia Goyen, he brings the name of the Parsha, Zois Tia. The Rambam in Seder Tfilos also brings down that it's called Zois Tia. Rashi brings down that's called Zois Tia. But we see that in later generations, in Shulchan Aruch and in the Torah, where it's discussed the Seder of the Kriyas HaTorah, and this is the Minhag Yisrael, right now, we call it Parshas Metzora. So here comes the Klotz Kasha, and in a way, two parts to the Klotz Kasha. Number one, how is it B'chalal that we're calling the name of a Parsha with something which is negative? Metzora is not only just plain negative, in a way it's the greatest negative. Why? Because concerning a Metzora, it says that he should be bodod, Yoshev, he's separated, isolated, away from everyone. Because as it's explained, what was the problem? How did he come to this idea? How did he become a tzaras, a Metzora? How? Because he spoke Lashon Hara. So Midah connected Midah, because he spoke Lashon Hara, which brings about division and separation. So therefore his punishment, Midah connected Midah, is that he has to be separated from everyone else. So even if there's a concept of different people that are impure and they have to be Mechutz Lamachne, he is the Mechutz Lamachnenik of all the Chutz Lamachneniks. The furthest of the furthest. Away from everybody. Like we have today in prisons. Those that are in literally solitary confinement. It's a whole different class of prisoner. It's a whole different category. So the one who has tzaras, because of speaking Lashon Hara, he's the one who's in solitary confinement, which means like the lowest of the low in that sense. Because as long as he's in society, he causes trouble because of his Lashon Hara, bringing division. Being in solitary confinement and doing tshuva, and he gets healed from that, and he has time to think and ruminate about what he did wrong, so then he can be brought back into society and not be someone who's going to cause damage. So we see that Metzora is not only somebody who is looked at in a negative way, that he did something wrong, but he did it in a certain sense, the worst. And therefore he has to be separated more than everyone else. So how can we call the name of a Parsha after a condition which reflects how in a certain sense you're the worst? Secondly, why this interesting fact that in the previous generation, in earlier generations, we called it Zois Tia, because actually the simple logic is because you don't want to use the word, a negative term for the name of a Parsha. So how is it that Punkt in later generations they use this negative term? And the answer is, as usual in Chassidus, the paradox of the highest of the high and the lowest of the low. We find something phenomenal. How the term of Metzora is used in a positive way. And this is the famous Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Tzadik Ches Amid Beis. I'm just going to read you a translation in English straight away, where Mashiach is called Chivra Debei Rabbi. Mashiach is called the Metzora of the house of Rabbi Yehuda the Prince. And the Gemara says, based on the pasuk, Chateinu Enosei, simple pshat in the Gemara is because of our sins that Mashiach is called and has tzaras. But obviously that's not enough, because we're talking about Mashiach, the top of the top. And why tzaras? We could have made him called the Tomei, etc., etc. Why tzaras? Why is he called the Metzora? And then there's another Gemara that comes right there. I'm going to read you in English. He says a story. Rabbi Shua ben Levi met Eliyahu Hanavi standing at the Heichel, at the entrance to the cave of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. And he asked Eliyahu, when will the Mashiach come? And Eliyahu answered, go ask him yourself. And he asked him, Rabbi Shua ben Levi, where is he sitting? And Eliyahu answered, at the entrance of the city. And then Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, by what sign will I be able to recognize him? And then Eliyahu said, he is sitting among destitute people afflicted with tzaras. But whereas the others first loosen all the bandages, and then, after treating all the sores, retie them all, he unties and reties his bandages one at a time, thinking, perhaps I will be summoned at any moment to reveal myself as the Messiah, and if so, I must not be delayed by having to rebandage many sores. So we see, the Gemara says, he's called the Metzora, and we see an actual story, whatever it means, in what sort of terms, and what sort of reality, that Mashiach is sitting over there bandaged with the bandages, and Eliyahu says he's afflicted with tzaras. So from this it's understood that obviously the highest of the high is connected to the lowest of the low, and that means it has to have a positive angle to it. And the answer is, let's first understand what is tzaras. As explained in Chassidus in many places, and I don't want to go into the details of how exactly it works out. In Kabbalah, it explains the levels of what it's related to, but it's explained in many places that the root word of Negoyim, which means these lesions, Oisius Nun Gimel Ayin, which is Nega, is also Oisius Ayin Nun Gimel Oinig, which is pleasure, which means the highest level. As explained in Chassidus, that there are 10 koiches hanefesh, 10 koiches primiyim, Chabad chagas nehim. Then there's 2 koiches makifim, rotzen and tainug. There's the pleasure principle, the pleasure drive, for lack of a better word, and then there's willpower. And according to Chassidus and Kabbalah, tainug, oinig, is the highest level. And why is it the highest level? Because it represents the totality. Without elaborating right now, if you were experiencing tainug right now, you'd be completely transported with that level of pleasure, and you wouldn't feel anything else. That level of pleasure would animate, would infuse your entire body, top to bottom, would completely be uplifted, exalted through that feeling of pleasure. That's why tainug is the highest level of Avodas Hashem, like Ava b'tanugim, as explained in Chassidus. When a tzaddik gomer is holding by Ava b'tanugim, it's like the highest level. So we see how tainug, oinig, is the same letters as nega, which means when you channel this tainug in a proper way, it's the highest level. But for whatever reason, there's a concept, and we've spoken about this many times, it's called yinika l'chitzonim. Sometimes amazing, powerful forces, which I remember, it just came to my mind now. I remember a sikh from the Friedrich Rebbe where he once says, von der Niedrigkeit, wo Ava ist gefallen, von der Niedrigkeit, wie Ava ist gefallen, kann verstehen, wie groß der Linie von Ava ist. I wish I would have thought about this before I started talking today, because it's a tremendous line. And you know what the Friedrich Rebbe was talking about then? He says from the novels, from the literature, which speaks about romance, and we see how sordid or low it is, we could see how great the concept of love is. Do you hear what I'm saying? That's what the Friedrich Rebbe writes, or spoke in a Sikha. I remember reading this. So now we're saying the same thing. We see this in many areas in Chassidus, from the force, from the energy, from the outcomes of certain things in a negative way. That itself proves to you how awesome and truly amazing the source of this thing is in holiness. And that's what's called unique l'chitzonim. Something magical, infinite, fantastic positivity could sometimes manifest itself as it comes down lower and lower, or someone took it the wrong way and it becomes totally twisted and perverted, etc. You could say today, if we talk about some of the progressive left and academia, where the concepts of social liberty and social justice, and like social justice, for example, the concept is beautiful, but it seems to be that by many people it's become twisted, and that's why the whole concept of social justice warriors are mocked, because they're hugging trees. Very nice that you're saving trees, but when it comes to your next door neighbor, you haven't thought about him for 5 minutes in the last 100 years. How he is, how his well-being is. Is he happy? Is he cared for? Etc. I'm just giving an example. I'm not here to condemn anyone or to judge anyone. I just want to bring out that actually in our times today that we're living in, we see how the most loftiest ideals and values, which comes from a good place, you'd think that that would bring about only good results. And no, we see sometimes the opposite, that they've taken this idea and channeled it in a wrong way, in a different way, and was in what it was originally intended. A perfect example is the concept of tikkun olam, tikkun olam, and we're not getting into that now. When you say Aleinu l'shabeach every day, and it says l'sakin olam b'malchus shakai shadai, it's talking about permeating the world with godliness. And of course we respect the birds and the bees and the trees and the plants because we see divinity in it. But that doesn't become the focus of the physical definition of just the concept of nature for nature's sake. It means divinity, and we really have more respect for a tree than a regular person. Therefore, there's a famous story with the Friedrich Rebbe and his father. The Rebbe Rashab was once strolling with the Friedrich Rebbe as a child, and he just ripped off a leaf of a tree, and the Rebbe Rashab told him, "How can you do that? It was a living thing," etc. I can't imagine the greatest social justice warrior in the world that's going to see somebody ripping off a leaf of a tree and then saying, "You know, you just committed a cardinal sin or something. Don't you realize what was going on right now?" So I'm just being an example. But we, because we're coming from Torah, we're looking at someone who ripped off a leaf of a tree as something that was terrible, because you took something that was alive and you disconnected it from its source. I'm just giving an example. So let's get back to our subject matter. We see this concept, something can have a very, very high source, and then there can be a unique l'chitzonim, it can manifest itself in a negative way. And you could say also, according to the measure of the descent, from how low it fell, you could tell really how high it is. As we brought the example from Ava that the Friedrich Rebbe says. Now back to Tzaras. So Chassidus says that the real meaning of Tzaras is a totally, totally high level of godliness that somehow became perverted and twisted, and it manifested itself in Tzaras. But wait, there's more. This whole Tzaras will not be found in any medical journal. As the Rambam says, as all the Mefarshim talk about, the whole condition, if you went to the greatest dermatologist in the world and he'll look at it, he'll shrug his shoulders and say, "I don't know, I've never seen this before. It's not of this world." It's not of this world. It's not of the same planet of ours. I've been in dermatology. I'm the greatest expert in the world. My name is Dr. Sherlock Holmes, and I graduated first in a class of 500. I know everything there is to know about dermatology. This is a condition which it's inexplicable. It's a medical mystery. Nothing works, nothing heals it, etc., etc. So the Rambam says this, and Chassidus brings out, the whole condition itself is miraculous, higher than the world. And the Maral talks about it in the Sugi and the Dorim, and he calls the Tzaras chutz miminhogei shel olam. It's something which is outside the normal scheme of things, the normal natural world order. And that's why Mashiach Tzurua, that's what the Maral says. Just like Tzaras is something which is outside the natural world order, it's outside the Minhagei Shel Olam, so too Mashiach is going to be something totally beyond, transcendental of the natural world order. That itself will be in the world, but the idea is it's going to be something beyond anything you can imagine, and at the same time in the world. But it's outside all limitations, beyond all limitations. So now, here we come to an unbelievable point. What's going to happen when Mashiach comes? What's going to be revealed is the essence of the world is going to be revealed. The hu levadi hu, the ein zelosei, the ultimate truth, how everything is God. So the divinity of Zdoinus, Naslik Izachis, is going to be revealed. And that's the level of Atzmos. See the Sikh of the Chelik Zayin. When we're dealing with a level of light, so then the only thing we could say is that it overcomes darkness. It could push away darkness. We spoke about this concept before. But only the level of Atzmos Umahus could, when that becomes revealed, the essence of everything reaches the essence of everything. And since the essence of everything is Eined Novadi, the lesser Sarponi Minei, everything is God. So when the essence of everything is going to be revealed, then we'll see how Metzora was good. The positive of it. In other words, what does it mean? That the essence of Tzaras itself is going to be revealed. We're going to see how Nega and Einig Hainarach, Al Derech, to say that Einig, that Nega will be transformed to Einig. And even more, we could look at the words of Nega and see Einig in Nega. And that's what the Rebbe says, amazing. Why Dafka, this Parsha, in our day, in our age, in our times, is called Metzora. Since we're holding closer to Mashiach, so already we begin to see in different areas of the world that previously was seen as a contradiction, and previously was seen as a question, now are seen as proofs, and now are seen as answers that reveal godliness. And that's why we could call this Parsha Metzora. We already see how these negative things, and this person had Tzaras, Zdoinis, Naslik Izachis, is on the highest level, because he reached the highest level of tshuva. The essence of everything is revealed in him. The essence of his neshama, which is a part of the Eibishter, became revealed. His sins were Zdoinis, Naslik Izachis, and therefore Metzora could be called Metzora, and we don't see it as the negative thing of Metzora, we see it totally as the positive thing of Metzora. And from this is an example, getting back to the beginning of our conversation today, we were talking about what does it mean to live Mashiach. I'll tell you that 700 years ago, we couldn't call this Parsha Metzora. We had to call it something else, because Mashiach was further away. But now we're beginning to live Mashiach Geula mentality. We could look at a word like Metzora and we could say, ot, soon. Now we're already living the times where Metzora could be seen as something positive. That's what's going to happen. And I just want to bring a couple of more examples by the Rebbe. We, not too long ago, celebrated Pesach. So we fill up the Koisei Shel Eliyahu. When do we fill up this Koisei Shel Eliyahu? As we're going to open the door after benching for Shrei Chamoscha. That's when you open up the door and greet Eliyahu Hanavi. So the custom is to pour Koisei Shel Eliyahu, that extra kois you pour, that's on the table, we poured it after benching. The Rebbe started something new, and he said even though the previous Rebbe used to pour the kois Shel Eliyahu and prepare it after benching, just as we're about to open the door for Shrei Chamascha, guess what? He instituted we should pour it before benching. Why? We're bringing in Mashiach earlier. We're bringing him closer, because we are closer. So again, it's a difference in actual conduct. We're talking about nafkamina, making an outcome. There was a time where the parsha was called Zeistia and not Metzora. Now it's called Metzora. There was a time we poured the Kaisel Elyo after benching, later on in the order of the night of the Seder, and then there's a time we pour it before benching, earlier, to show that now we're in a different state of mind. Geula mentality. We bring it earlier. Now, interestingly, I heard, it should be looked up, that there was a year when the Rebbe made the Seder in the library next to 770, and there were those that witnessed how the Rebbe went to the door and opened up the door to greet Elio. I've heard from people that were eyewitnesses, they'll never forget it, the look of the Rebbe's face. Now, I can't describe it, but it was like something special. So too similar to, because it shows how the Rebbe is living Mashiach. Now, so too, people talk about the Rebbe's conduct during the Seder, and as usual, the Rebbe is like different, unparalleled, unique. When you talk about the history of Gedolim or Tzaddikim, and you talk about their conduct during the Seder, you'll always hear about how they pontificated and spoke and were acting by all the first part of the Seder, Haggadah, until benching. Both about how they spoke so much about every keta in the Haggadah. There's so much to talk about. And also when it came to the matzah, morer, how they performed each mitzvah, etc. When it comes to the Rebbe, the people that talk about the Rebbe's, the experience of being by the Rebbe, they all say the same thing. That the Rebbe, from the part of the Haggadah, which is like from benching, and like especially afterwards, which that whole part of the Haggadah is about the coming redemption, Mashiach. The first half of the Haggadah is about Yetzias Mitzrayim. The second part of the Haggadah is about Mashiach. I'm not going to get into it now, but that's the way it is. So they all say that the second part of the Haggadah by the Rebbe was such a spiritual Gilui Elokus, divine revelation, they will never forget it. People that were there and reminisce and try to describe exactly how the Rebbe davened and said the words, it's all about the second part of that Haggadah, not the first part. The first part the Rebbe said mostly audibly lower. People don't talk about how it was just an unbelievable experience to watch the Rebbe say the words in the second part of the Haggadah after benching. They say it was beyond. They saw divinity. The Rebbe became like alive. Now most people, including tzaddikim and gedolim, the second part of that Haggadah, say whatever you want. For normal people, it's because we're tired, we drank kaises, we had a whole shulchan aruch. And for the other tzaddikim, whatever the reason is, they didn't put such a great emphasis on the second part of the Haggadah. And by the Rebbe, we see the opposite. There was less of an animation and a fiery intensity in the first part of the Haggadah than in the second part, where everyone points that out and notes how the Rebbe, when it came to the part of the Haggadah which is connected to the coming redemption, Mashiach, it's like the Rebbe first became animated compared to what was before. That's what we hear from many eyewitnesses. So the lesson from this is obvious about how much we have to koschem Mashiach. So we spoke about the idea of the Parsha. We connected it to Chav Ches Nisan. That's what it means to live Mashiach-dik. We explained what it means, that the ultimate meaning of refuah means not only that you get healed, but not only that you're good as ever, but you're better than ever, which is the same idea of Zdenis Lasek Gizachis. We reveal how the lowest of the low becomes the highest of the high, because the source of that is actually the highest of the high. And quickly, let's just connect it to the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos this week. We spoke about this Mishnah many times. There's the Mishnah which says that there's one level where it's Batal Ritzeinchol Neiritzeinai, nullify your will to his will, and the other one is Asei Ritzeinai Kitzeincha, make your will his will. So the difference is, if it's just nullify your will to his will, that means it's very nice, you're nullifying your will to his will, but that means that his will is greater. It overpowers your will. You push away aside your will to do his will. That's called bittul, that's called iskafia in a way. But if we say means there's no two wills. Not that you have a will. You would rather be drinking beer and eating pizza, but you can go run to Shachas. That means batal ritzayin. But if you say you don't care about beer and pizza right now, you love davening, you're running to davening. There's only one will, his will. And that's what it means over here. Metzora itself is not overpowered. That itself, your will, becomes his will. Whatever was previously Tainig is revealed, whatever previously was connected to Einig, that itself becomes Nega, becomes Einig. They should help that we should have a wonderful, wonderful month. Atzlacha Rabbi in all areas, especially in Ani Hashem Mefecha. Whoever needs it for Shleima should be healed right now. A Freilich Chodesh, a Guten Shabbos, and it all starts with us, as the Rebbe said, Tut als was ihr kennt. Do everything you can to bring Mashiach. Let's start with Geula mentality. We'll start living Mashiach with Geula mentality, and now you have to think of all the different ways how, because you're living with a Geula mentality, your whole life is going to start being a bit differently and more uplifted and upgraded spiritually. And we'll do our part. Isha ki Tazria, which is explained, we do our part, and then V'yolda Zacha, we see immediate results. The Gula Mitzvah Shlema, take it from Yad Mamish. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, your man in Melbourne.